They called it the Silence War. Not because there were no battles, there were plenty, but because no one heard them coming. No ultimatums, no declarations, no intercepted transmissions. Just stars blinking out, fleets turned to floating wrecks, planets falling dark in synchronized collapse, and at the heart of every attack, a human fleet no one knew existed. For decades, humans were presumed extinct. After the Glavian purge of Sol's system, every major species, especially the Elkar Dominion, recorded Earth as dead space. Scorched and forgotten. A footnote in the Dominion's glorious conquest, a warning to others who might resist. The Elkar celebrated the purge every year with fireworks over their capital moon, mocking the race that once dared to defy them. No one noticed the silence in the outer sectors, the flicker of black ships slipping through hyperspace. No one remembered the old human colonies lost beyond the rim, and no one asked what happened to the third generation of Terran exiles who had vanished into the black 3 centuries ago, until Dagon Prime fell. That world, an Elkar stronghold fortified with gravity lances, orbital mines, and 27 defense platforms, was gone in under an hour. Surveillance feeds showed only shadows and death. Ships that moved like predators, black as vacuum, stripped of all logos, powered by something far beyond Dominion tech. The few survivors spoke of silence, of massive ships blotting out the sky, no demands, no offers of surrender, just impact, precision, cold annihilation. The Dominion Council dismissed the report, called it exaggeration, called the survivors cowards, until the same thing happened again. And again, and again. Worlds burned, garrisons vanished, comms went dark. Panic spread like radiation. The only thing linking the events was the symbol burned into the wreckage. An ancient Terran sigil. Not a flag, not an emblem. Just 3 words etched in plasma. We remember everything. High Lord Tarsik, the supreme strategist of the Dominion, summoned his inner circle. They scoured ancient data archives, dusty records from the pre-purge wars. That's when they found it. Project Exodus, a forgotten contingency plan buried beneath bureaucratic rubble, spearheaded by a Terran commander who disappeared during the final days of the Sol siege. A man named Commander Rhine. He was presumed dead. They all were. But then again, so was Earth. Rhine had been known for one thing: never backing down. Even when Earth begged for surrender, even when the last governments fell, he took a fleet and vanished into deep space, leaving only a message behind. They will forget us. Let them. That is when we'll return. The inner circle laughed it off, until a Dominion admiral defected and brought footage of a captured ship, human tech beyond comprehension. A vessel powered by a core that twisted space itself, capable of instant system jumps, untraceable energy signatures, weapons that bypassed shields as if they weren't even there. The human fleet was not just advanced, it was angry and methodical. They didn't attack civilians. They didn't strike randomly. They hit military worlds, data centers, shipyards, strategic, surgical, brutal. Every move spoke of someone who studied the Dominion from the shadows, someone who knew exactly how they'd fall, and they were falling. Within 5 months, the Dominion had lost 1/3 of its territory. Morale collapsed, factions splintered, whispers of the Terran return infected the halls of power. The Council began purging its own, suspecting treason. Still, no one knew where the fleet came from, until a single human broadcast shattered the veil. It lasted 7 seconds. One man, staring into the feed with dead eyes. No insignia, no rank, just scars, stubble, and a voice like cold iron. 300 years ago, you burned our world. We remembered. Now you'll forget yours. The feed cut. The next system fell in 20 minutes. The sky over Earth had been bleeding fire. That's what Commander Rhine remembered most from that day. The horizon split by burning satellites, orbital wreckage falling like iron rain, oceans steaming under energy blasts that cracked the crust. The Elcar called it a purge, but it wasn't war. It was slaughter. By the time they broke Earth's defenses, most of the Terran Federation's fleets were dust. What few warships remained were old, underpowered, patched with desperation and duct tape. The outer colonies had long abandoned the core worlds. Trade collapsed. Politics rotted. But still, Rhine fought. He had commanded the Aegis Dawn, the last of the Vanguard-class carriers. It was crippled, half the systems jury-rigged, half the crew volunteers and conscripts. But it flew. And as the orbital stations fell one by one, he gathered what remained of the old fleet and vanished into uncharted deep space. They called it Exodus. They didn't leave to survive. They left to be forgotten. The Dominion didn't chase. Why would they? Earth was a cinder. Humanity was done. The Elcar had bigger threats to deal with in the galactic core. Species with fleets, with politics, with power. Not some broken little mammal race clinging to nostalgia and ruined stone. But Rhine didn't forget. None of them did. They drifted for decades through the edge of mapped space. Famine came first, then madness, then betrayal. 2 of the ships turned pirate, preying on their own. Rhine put them down himself. No trials, no speeches, just airlocks. They finally found a system. No name, just coordinates. 1 star, 3 planets. The second world was hell, volcanic, scarred, toxic. But under all that, rich with raw metals, pressure-hardened materials, and old, deep geothermal veins. Enough to build, enough to wait. They named it Haven. Not because it was safe, but because it was the last place they'd ever stop running. It took 70 years to build the first city beneath the crust. They didn't live long enough to see it. Most of the original fleet was gone. But their children did. And those children were angry. Rhine taught them to never forget. Not through stories, through silence, through discipline, through preparation. The next generation wasn't raised with dreams of peace. They were raised with schematics, with combat drills, with old war footage from the Saul massacre playing on loop in their training halls. They weren't taught to forgive. They were taught to outlive. By the 2nd century, the Terran descendants had no nations, no politics, no games, only a council of veterans, those who survived the worst and carried the code forward. Every birth was registered, every resource allocated, every ship designed with one purpose: return. The black ships weren't built to fly. They were built to strike. No signals, no trails. Everything about them, optics, comms, engines, was engineered to be invisible. They weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were predators. And the man who led them wasn't Commander Rhine anymore. He was simply the ghost. He hadn't aged like a normal man. The medical tech they'd developed, long-forgotten human experimentation combined with alien salvage, had kept him alive well past his natural span. Not young, not old. Something in between. Hardened. Cold. He didn't speak unless needed. Didn't debate, didn't forgive. The Dominion thought it had broken the human will. What it had done was purify it. By the time the human fleet was ready, Rhine didn't want justice. He wanted silence, the kind of silence that follows extinction. He launched the first wave on his 300th birthday. 6 black ships. No signals. No return path. The target was minor, a Dominion listening post on the edge of Sector 9. But it housed archives, data, personnel, analysts, strategists, and it fell without warning, without resistance. The attack lasted 43 seconds. No survivors. The Elcar Council chalked it up to pirates. But then came the Dagon strike, then the Charon shipyards, then a full Dominion cruiser battle group vanished without a trace near the Dranix Nebula. By then, panic had set in. The Ghost never broadcast a threat, never offered demands. He wasn't seeking attention. He was erasing them. One admiral defected to survive. His name was Kovar, a Dominion veteran who had served during the Purge of Sol. He'd retired with honors. Thought it was over. When his home planet lit up with a coordinated orbital bombardment, faster than the speed of light sensors could track, he knew what it was. Ryan hadn't just remembered the names of the planets. He remembered the officers. Kovar handed himself over to the human fleet. He expected death. What he got instead was a single question. "How many others survived the Purge High Command?" Kovar answered. "Every name, every location, every hiding place." The next 4 months were a bloodbath, not of civilians, not of infrastructure, of command. The very spine of the Dominion snapped like bone under pressure. Back on the Dominion capital, High Lord Tarsik finally understood the truth. This wasn't a rebellion. This wasn't a resistance. It was a harvest. Every decision made by the human fleet showed surgical precision, psychological warfare, strategic annihilation, and every soldier in black carried no names, only one word etched into their armor in old Earth script: remember. Now, entire sectors were falling without battle. Elcar warships fled at the first sight of a black silhouette. Refugees poured into neutral systems. Trade collapsed. Planetary governors began declaring independence just to avoid being next. And still, no one knew where the fleet came from. No traces, no supply lines, no transmissions, just silence. Until the day the Ghost finally spoke again. A Dominion fleet, desperate, cornered, dying, managed to disable one of the smaller human vessels. It crash-landed on a moon near the Aryan Belt. A salvage team found the wreckage, torn apart by Dominion guns. Inside, they found a single pilot. He was barely alive. Skin pale, blood freezing, bones shattered. But when they tried to interrogate him, he laughed through a mouthful of broken teeth. "You think this ends with me?" he said. "We're not a fleet. We're the storm you thought you could bury." And then he bit down on a hidden neural detonation implant, disintegrating his own skull before they could extract data. Still, the Dominion had one clue: a partial star map. Ancient. Fragmented. But it pointed to a system no longer on record, a place buried under hundreds of years of gravitational drift and dark matter storms. They called it the Black Cradle. They dispatched a scout fleet, 12 ships, some of the best they had left. Only one came back. The captain of that vessel arrived in a state of catatonic shock. His ship's AI handled the return jump. When Dominion medics pulled him from the cockpit, he had clawed bloody lines down his own face and kept whispering one sentence: "They're building more." The Elcar Dominion's golden age was rotting from within. With every passing week, their empire shrank. Former allies began breaking their pacts. Border worlds started flying new flags or no flags at all. Trade routes turned into battlegrounds, and faith in the Council evaporated. The term Ghost Fleet now carried more weight than entire fleets of Dominion warships. Across the stars, whispers spread faster than facts, legends of black ships that warped gravity, of humans who never died, of commanders who walked through fire and came out colder. But what rattled the Dominion most wasn't the death toll. It was the precision. Every strike hit something important. Every decision felt personal. It was as if the humans had spent centuries studying not just their tech, but their psychology, their weaknesses, their patterns. Entire regiments fell into ambushes the humans should have never known about. And yet, they always did. The Ghost didn't just fight like a man. He fought like a ghost of memory itself, wielding old grudges as weapons. And now they were multiplying. The Dominion's scout mission to the Black Cradle had proven it. This wasn't a single fleet. This was an empire reborn beneath the surface of reality. Building in silence. Training generations on the bones of a dead Earth. When High Lord Tarsik received the data pulled from the lone surviving scout ship, he didn't call his council. He called Project Excision. It was a classified initiative, hidden so deep that even the Dominion's own elite had only heard rumors. A kill switch built centuries ago for species thought too dangerous to leave unchecked. The logic was simple. If total war couldn't stop them, genocide would. The target wasn't the ghost. It wasn't even the fleet. It was the source. Tarsik issued a blackout order on the system known only by its old code name, Echo 7. The records claimed it was a failed mining colony. In reality, it was a prison satellite, housing the most advanced bioweapons the Dominion had ever engineered. Locked. Forgotten. Until now. 2 weeks later, a Dominion destroyer arrived at Echo 7 and activated the last stored payload, Orcus 9. It was a plague designed to burn through neural tissue, targeting only specific DNA markers, in this case, the human genome. No cure, no containment. Once released, it would drift through systems, bond to oxygen molecules, and begin the slow process of turning blood to ash. Dominion officers launched the payload and set its path toward the suspected coordinates of the Black Cradle. It never arrived. 3 days into its path, the ship vanished. Not destroyed, not hijacked, just gone. The Dominion assumed a malfunction, until it happened again. Then again. Then again. 4 separate delivery missions, 4 disappearances. By the 5th attempt, they stopped trying, because the message came through. Tarsik awoke to it blinking on his private terminal. No origin, no traceable signal. Just a short video file. It opened with a simple shot. A Dominion admiral, one of the plague payload commanders, strapped to a chair. Blood trickled from his eyes. His lips were sewn shut. His breathing was shallow. Behind him, a silhouette stepped into view. It was the ghost. He didn't speak at first, just circled the man like a teacher correcting a student. Then, in a voice as quiet as frost, he said, "You tried to finish what you started." Again. He looked into the camera. "This isn't revenge, this is prevention." Then the screen turned to static. The feed ended. The Admiral's body was found orbiting the Dominion capital, embedded in the outer hull of the High Council Tower. No explanation. No break-in. Just there. The Dominion's leadership began to fracture. Some wanted negotiations. Others demanded escalation. A few even suggested abandoning the outer colonies and consolidating in the core. But none of it mattered, because the ghost had already moved on to Phase 3. His goal was never just collapse. It was isolation. And it was working. One by one, Dominion allies signed secret accords with the human fleet. Not because they loved humans, but because they feared what the Dominion had become. Paranoid. Vengeful. Weak. Some species remembered Earth differently, not as conquerors or fools, but as builders, traders, innovators, the first race to break gravity with nothing but sweat and steel, the first to put emotion above protocol. Now, they were something else entirely. At the edge of Dominion space, in a system stripped bare by war, a new kind of signal emerged. It was ancient human code, piggybacking on defunct satellites, repeating the same message. Sul has returned. It was an invitation, or a warning. It reached every known sector in under a day. Meanwhile, in the Black Cradle, beneath layers of iron sky and electromagnetic storms, the Terran Council convened. They weren't politicians. They weren't even officers in the traditional sense. They were survivors, men and women forged in the silence of deep space, guided by the Ghost's teachings. Every one of them had lost something to the purge: parents, children, home. Now they controlled the most dangerous force in known space. One of the younger commanders, a man known only as Kalen, stood at the tactical holotable, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow from years of training in vacuum environments. "Dominion Command is flailing," he said. "Tarsik's running scared. We've crippled their production, shattered their chain of command, collapsed their trade." "And the people?" another voice asked. Kalen hesitated. "Starving, fleeing, revolting. Some are even hailing us as liberators." A pause. Then the Ghost stepped forward from the shadows behind the council. His coat was dark, frayed, his face unreadable, eyes like burned coal. "We are not liberators," he said flatly. "We are a warning." Silence. Then he turned to Kalen. "Begin Phase 4. Kalen stiffened. "Are you sure?" "That puts our assets on open record. Once we move forward, they already know we exist," the Ghost cut him off. "Let them see how far we've come." He tapped a control node. A new map lit up, star systems marked in red, each one corresponding to a key piece of Dominion culture: religious centers, historical archives, elite academies. Burn the legacy. Leave the bones. It was poetic, in a way. The Dominion had tried to erase Earth from memory. Now Earth would erase them. Back in Dominion space, chaos had become routine. Former colonies broadcast desperate pleas for peace. Pirate syndicates claimed entire trade networks. And in the midst of it, black ships floated like judges over systems that didn't even resist anymore. But there was one system left untouched. Elkar Prime. The Dominion's cradle. The place where the purge had been signed, authorized, celebrated. Where the Ghost's parents had been executed live on interstellar feed as propaganda. For years, no Terran ship had gone near it. Not because it was too dangerous, but because it wasn't time. Now it was. On the eve of the next solar cycle, Elkar's moons were blotted out by something unnatural. A fleet so large it darkened the orbital grid. Not just warships, terraformers, carriers, massive obsidian-class dreadnoughts with hulls carved from asteroids and reinforced with unknown alloys. They didn't fire. They simply hovered, watching, waiting. And then came the broadcast. Not from the Ghost this time, but from every speaker system, every personal terminal, every public square on Elkar Prime. A single line. "You watched us burn. Now you'll learn what silence sounds like." On Elkar Prime, fear had replaced authority. The capital city, once gleaming with polished towers and quantum latticework, now looked like a fortress preparing for its last stand. For the first time in generations, the Elkar people saw military patrols in the streets, not for ceremony or pride, but desperation. Civilians watched the skies with dread. The artificial moons, once symbols of technological supremacy, were gone, eclipsed by the black ships. They had heard the stories, dismissed them as myth, propaganda, rebellion-fueled lies. But now the shadow above was real and silent. No threats, no demands, just presence. High Lord Tarsik had not slept in 4 days. Every attempt to contact the Ghost was met with nothing. Dominion fleets had already abandoned outposts, defected, or vanished trying to intercept him. He knew now, deep in his decaying pride, that the war was lost. But there was still a choice to be made. He summoned his command staff to the Central Spire, an underground compound built to withstand planet-cracking strikes. A tomb disguised as strategy. "Options," he demanded, voice hoarse. General Akros, one of the last remaining loyalists, spoke first. "We still have the planetary cannon. Its arc covers low orbit. We could hit the lead dreadnought, cripple their staging ship. Tarsik shook his head. And invite retaliation? No, they're waiting. Not because they can't strike, but because they want us to panic. What then? Akros growled. Surrender? Surrender implies negotiation. They're not here to talk. Tarsik turned toward the central screen. It showed the flagship. No name, just the Terran sigil. 3 stars, cracked and burning, wrapped in an Ouroboros, a symbol of rebirth through destruction. We hold, Tarsik muttered, until we know their intent. But they didn't have to wait long. The broadcast came exactly 72 hours after the first shadow appeared. It played across every channel, visible and encrypted alike. Even children's implants couldn't block it. Dominion AIs failed to intercept or halt the feed. It was as if the system itself had submitted. The screen went black. Then, an old Earth melody began. Piano. Software broken. A tune from centuries ago, lost to most species but unforgettable to Terran blood. A nursery lullaby. Then came the voice. The ghost. You watched our world die. You cheered as children turned to ash. You built empires on bones. And now, when the wind turns, you wonder if the storm can be reasoned with. His face appeared, older now, worn, scarred, but behind his eyes, calm. The calm of someone who no longer doubts, someone beyond rage. We were not your equals then. We are not your equals now. We are something else, something you cannot measure with fleets or alliances. He leaned closer to the feed. You thought silence meant submission. It didn't. It meant calculations, a feed cut. Seconds later, the first strike hit. But it wasn't a bombardment. It was a pulse. A coordinated EMP burst across every Elkar orbital platform, war satellite, and planetary cannon. Lights died. Gravity anchors collapsed. Drones dropped from the sky like dead birds. The capital city plunged into blackout. Then came the second wave. Not weapons. Voice. The Terran fleet deployed wideband psychological warfare programs. Loops of purge footage played back over the city's public squares. Reversed images of burning Earth mirrored with present-day Elkar footage. We remember. We are not gone. You are. The civilian population broke. Riots erupted as fear turned into madness. Parents tried to flee with their children only to find that transport networks were frozen. Panic became suffocation. General Akros tried to launch a retaliatory strike manually, but the command center doors never opened. When his guards tried to override the lockdown, they found the access codes had been rewritten. By whom? No one knew. But then someone checked the logs. The override protocol had a signature. Not Elkar, not Dominion, Terran. The ghost had already entered the system's brain. Tarsik stood in the observation tower as the sky flickered with the dance of orbital fire. Human ships weren't firing in waves. They were dissecting targets. One defense structure at a time. Never overkill, just surgical. One by one, the lights over Elkar went out. But Tarsik wasn't done yet. He activated the final protocol. Deep beneath the capital was a chamber most Elkar didn't even know existed. A vault containing a relic of pre-Dominion age. The Soulfire Protocol. An AI weapon that merged with a user's consciousness, amplifying commands into reality-level computational warfare. It required a life to activate. Tarsik inserted his credentials and placed both hands into the neural cradle. It began. Pain ripped through him as the AI flooded his synapses. It screamed against his mind, ancient, furious, twisted by time, but it responded. Above, Dominion war factories that had been dormant for centuries powered on. Drones launched, counter-signal barrages erupted, and orbital mines activated. It was Elcar Prime's last gasp. And the ghost answered it personally. On board the flagship Vigilant Memory, he watched as Dominion defenses screamed back to life. He didn't flinch. "Do we engage the drones?" Kalen asked at his side. "No," the ghost replied. "Let them exhaust everything." "But they're regenerating systems. They're adapting." "Exactly. Let them reach their peak. Let them believe they still have control." Minutes passed. The battle in orbit intensified. For a brief moment, Elcar weapons actually grazed the outer hulls of Terran dreadnoughts. Dominion command rooms cheered, until every single Terran ship disappeared, not exploded, not shot down, just vanished. Sensors read nothing, communications blacked out, even AI tracking systems failed. Elcar forces froze. Then the ghost reappeared. Not in orbit, on the surface. Dozens of black ships dropped from low atmosphere, bypassing all defense layers, using trans-gravity folds the Dominion had only theorized about. They landed silently across the capital like judges stepping into court. The ghost walked among them. No helmet, no armor, just a black coat, a pulse pistol on one side, and silence on the other. Elcar soldiers surrounded him, shaking. Some dropped their weapons, others fired, only to find their guns jammed by unknown interference. He walked straight toward the central spire, and no one stopped him. Inside, the elevator rose. Tarsik, still plugged into the Soulfire cradle, felt the tremor. His vision blurred. The AI screamed in protest. The elevator doors opened, and the ghost stepped in. Tarsik tried to unleash the Soulfire's full wrath. Digital tendrils lashed out to kill the intruder. But they didn't reach. The ghost didn't even move. A single pulse from a drone behind him, an anti-neural wave, neutralized the entire cradle. The lights dimmed. The AI died, and the Elcar dream ended. Tarsik coughed blood, slumping forward, eyes wide in disbelief. "You're not just soldiers," he gasped. "You're gods." "No," the ghost said. "Just men you should have killed properly." And with that, Tarsik died. His body slumped over the machine that once made him a ruler. Outside, the Black Fleet began its retreat. No occupation, no demands, no banners. The Elcar Dominion had fallen, and in the silence that followed, one message was broadcast to the entire galaxy. Let this be the only warning we ever give. There were no victory parades, no fireworks, no grand declarations from balconies. The Terrans didn't celebrate. They dismantled. Within a week of the Dominion's fall, the Black Fleet withdrew from Elcar Prime and vanished into the stars without a trace. Cities were left smoldering but untouched by further strikes. No installations were occupied, no spoils were taken, and the message was clear. This was never about ruling you. It was about erasing what you were. Across former Dominion space, species scrambled to understand what had happened. Some cheered in the shadows, glad to see the Elcar fall. Others panicked, unsure if the Ghost's fleet would come for them next. But no further attacks came. Just silence. The Terran fleet was gone. Like a storm that rolls in, tears the sky open, and disappears before dawn. But inside the black cradle, the Ghost didn't rest. He watched the stars from the observation deck of the Vigilant Memory, the ship that had led the war. The others had returned to Haven and the surrounding colonies, now fully self-sufficient and hidden again under advanced cloaking veils. But the Ghost remained in the dark, orbiting nothing. He stood alone, except for one figure beside him, Kalen, the commander who had carried out the strikes with unwavering loyalty. "They're rebuilding already," Kalen said. "What's left of the Dominion. Smaller factions, civilian councils, trying to piece it all back together." The Ghost didn't look away from the stars. "Let them. You don't want to strike again? We struck enough." Kalen hesitated, then asked the one question no one else dared. Was this justice? The silence stretched long. When the ghost finally answered, it came out hollow. Justice doesn't feel this empty. Kalen didn't reply. He knew better than to press further. But the doubt had been growing for months. He had felt it during the Phase 4 operations, when they'd hit not just military targets, but historical archives, educational centers. Not to destroy knowledge, but to erase identity. He had watched children flee burning homes, not because the fleet aimed at them, but because the war didn't distinguish anymore. Kalen remembered the purge. His parents had died screaming under Dominion fire. But now, years later, he couldn't ignore the pattern. Had they become the very thing they hated? That night, Kalen walked into the ship's data core and accessed something forbidden. Operation Ember protocols. A buried file under black clearance, one only the ghost was supposed to access. It contained logs. Thousands of them. And they weren't war plans. They were execution lists, not just soldiers, scientists, historians, engineers, civilians flagged for cultural contamination. They weren't all guilty. Some were just Elcar. Kalen stared at the files for a long time, then quietly walked out. He said nothing, but the seed of doubt had taken root. Back on Haven, the mood was different. Generations of humans, children and grandchildren of the exiled, had never even seen Earth. They didn't carry the trauma of the purge the way their parents did. All they knew was the cold, the silence, the drills, and now, the silence was lifting. For the first time, sunlight touched the domed cities under Haven's crust. The blackout protocols were lifted. Streets buzzed with cautious music. Laughter echoed for the first time in decades. A council gathering was held. Not a military one, civilian. A historian named Marek stood before a crowded chamber and asked the question everyone feared. What do we do now? They had been bred to fight, trained to avenge. Every system, every school, every song had been built around pain and retaliation. But now that the war was over, no one knew who they were supposed to be. Marek proposed something radical. Restoration. Not of Earth, it was gone, but of knowledge, of culture, of the things lost not just in the purge, but in the obsession that followed it. There was resistance, of course. Some saw it as betrayal. Others called it weakness. But the motion passed. For the first time since the Ghost's exodus, the Terrans opened their gates to outside species, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. A new fleet was built, not black, not silent. White, sleek, diplomatic vessels, staffed with a new generation who had never fired a weapon in war. They were called the Recall Envoys. Their job wasn't to threaten, it was to remind, to tell the truth of what happened, and what could happen again. But even as Haven began to bloom, the ghost withered. He spent more time in isolation. Fewer orders, fewer meetings. The crew began to whisper. Kalen visited one night. He found the ghost alone in a chamber of relics, pieces of the old Earth, a broken Terran flag, charred remains from the first orbital strikes, and a photo of the original Exodus crew. I read the files, Kalen said quietly. The ghost didn't turn around. Then you understand why we couldn't leave it to chance. They weren't all guilty. They watched, the ghost replied, and watching made them complicit. But what about us? Kalen asked. What have we become? For the first time, the ghost turned. His eyes were bloodshot, tired, not from battle but from memory. We became survivors. Kalen stepped closer. And now? Now the ghost had no answer. He simply looked down at the cracked photo in his hand. You know the irony, he whispered. I don't even remember their names. My crew, the ones who followed me into exile, I burned so many memories to keep the mission alive that I forgot what we were saving." Kalen watched him, heart heavy. "It doesn't have to end like this." It already has. A few weeks later, the vigilant memory vanished. No launch, no broadcast, no trail. The ghost left no message, only his coat, hung on a chair in the command bridge, and a final log file embedded in the ship's AI. It played only once, to Kalen. "I was not a hero," the ghost said. "I was a knife, a tool. I did what needed to be done. But a knife doesn't belong in a cradle." His last words. "Don't remember me. Remember why." The ghost's disappearance changed everything. Not all at once. Not in a grand moment, but like erosion. Quiet, subtle, inevitable. At first, the Terran command structure held strong. Kalen and the remaining council members took charge, guiding Haven and its allied colonies toward a new era. One built not on vengeance, but on remembrance. The white ships of the recall envoys became a familiar sight across former Dominion territories. They were welcomed in some places, tolerated in others, and outright rejected by a few. But even those who hated the Terrans dared not attack them. Not yet. Still, within the heart of Haven, a new tension stirred. Some of the old guard, veterans who had fought beside the ghost, men who had lost everything in the Exodus, began to murmur. They saw Kalen's diplomatic missions as weakness, a betrayal of everything the ghost had built. Among them, one voice grew louder than the rest. Commander Drex. He had served under the ghost during the first strike on Dagon Prime. A ruthless tactician. Loyal. Unyielding. But his loyalty had always been to the war, not the ghost's vision of calculated justice. Now, with the ghost gone and Kalen preaching peace, Drex saw his opportunity. At a closed-door assembly deep in the military dome, Drex stood before a small crowd of hardened officers and said what many feared to admit. "We were made to end them," he growled, "not to preach to them." Kalen, of course, was aware of the tension. He had spies in every unit, every corridor of Haven's core. He knew Drex would move eventually, but he hadn't expected it to be so fast. On the 5th month of peace, a Terran envoy ship, Pathfinder Blue, was shot down over the Author Expanse. There were no survivors. At first, local pirates were blamed, but when the data logs were recovered, the truth was worse. The projectile had been Terran, one of their own. The war hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. Kalen convened the emergency council under the stone halls of the original Exodus base, where the first black ship had been designed, and where the ghost had once sworn to return only when the war was over. Now Kalen stood at that very same pulpit, reading the recovered logs aloud. Trajectory confirms a stealth drone launched from orbit sector 9G. Weapon signature matches prototype line, Ghost Reapers. A hush fell over the room. Those ships weren't supposed to exist anymore. They had been decommissioned after the Elkar fall. Stored. Scrapped. But someone had kept them. A council member leaned forward, voice tight with dread. "Is this Drex?" "We don't have proof, yet," Kalen answered. "But if it is..." Kalen didn't hesitate. "Then he's become the very thing we fought." Far from Haven, hidden in the remains of an old Terran relay station orbiting a dead moon, Drex had built something he called the True Path. It wasn't a rebellion. Not exactly. It wasn't even a fleet in the traditional sense. It was an idea, one built around a single belief. Peace was betrayal. He recruited silently, not with grand speeches, but with whispers, with promises. "You served with honor," he told soldiers in the shadows. "You watched comrades burn. Now Kalen wants you to play diplomat while the galaxy forgets what they did to us?" Some joined for belief, others for rage, some simply because they were lost in the silence that followed war. And Drex gave them something they craved: purpose. Kalen, desperate to prevent civil war, launched an outreach campaign. He sent emissaries, offered amnesty, promised inclusion. Most were never heard from again. One returned, barely alive, with a single message burned into his armor. "The ghost was our sword. You are just the sheath." For months, skirmishes remained isolated. Sabotage missions, whisper campaigns, propaganda spread through neural link networks, casting Kalen as a coward, a politician, a traitor. Then the attacks escalated. 3 colony vessels were destroyed in hyperspace, ghost strikes that matched Reaper tech. Entire systems began withdrawing from the Haven Pact. And the worst part? Some former allies of the Dominion started arming again, because the message was getting twisted. To them, there were no more humans, only black ships and white ships. And if the black ones were back, they'd strike first this time. The cycle had begun again. Only now, it wasn't a war between Terrans and aliens. It was a war within humanity itself. One night, deep within the vaults of Haven's war archive, Kalen stood before the Ghost's final logs. Files locked behind encryption he was never supposed to see. But the system had changed. Without the Ghost, the network defaulted to senior authority override. And Kalen was now that authority. He played the last log. The Ghost appeared, not in armor, not in uniform, but as a man. Haunted. Tired. "Every war leaves a second war behind," he said. "The one no one talks about. The one in the hearts of those who can't forget." He leaned forward. "I trained them to win. I never trained them to stop." And there it was. The truth Kalen had feared. The Ghost had built a machine of vengeance, but he never built a way to turn it off. Now Kalen had to do what even the Ghost hadn't done. End it. The plan wasn't complex, but it was dangerous. He would find Drex, not to fight him, not at first, to face him, to offer him something no one else had, closure. Not as a commander, but as a witness. He ordered the council to keep his departure classified. Only one man knew, an old technician who had once served with both the Ghost and Drex. His name was Bale, and his body was failing, but his memory was still sharp. "I told him back then," Bale rasped. "You raise men to be blades. Don't be surprised when they start cutting on their own." Kalen nodded. "I need to talk to him. Just talk." Bale laughed bitterly. "Then take armor. You might need it." 3 weeks later, in the silence of the dead moon orbiting Varn's belt, Kalen landed a white stealth pod on the old relay station where Drex had built his fortress. No guns, no fleet, just a signal flare and a message. Commander Kalen, alone, unarmed, requesting parley. The hatch opened 3 hours later, and Drex walked out. He looked older, rougher, eyes bloodshot, voice heavier, but his back was straight. "You have a lot of nerve," he growled. Kalen didn't flinch. "So did the Ghost. That's why we followed him." "You turned your back on his mission." "I honored it," Kalen replied calmly. "He gave us justice. I gave us a future." "You gave them mercy." "No," Kalen said. "I gave us mercy." Drex stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a snarl, he drew a blade, an old Earth combat knife, etched with the Ghost's name, and stabbed it into the ground between them. "Talk," he growled, "but make it count." The relay station was silent. No hum of reactors, no flicker of ancient monitors, just cold metal and the breath of 2 men who had survived a war but now stood on opposite sides of what came next. Commander Drex's knife trembled in the floor between them, vibrating with the station's low orbit oscillation. Kalen didn't look at the weapon. He looked at the man. "You've been busy," Kalen said, eyes steady. Drex sneered. "While you give speeches and paint ships white, yes. Some of us remember what we were trained for." "You were trained to end a threat," Kalen said calmly. The Dominion's gone. No, Drex barked. It changed. It's hiding behind children now, behind councils and restorations. They just wear new skin. Kalen stepped forward, careful not to provoke. And what are we, Drex? What do we wear now? The ex-commander's jaw clenched. We wear the memory of Sul, of burning oceans, of ash in our mouths and screams in our ears. We wear the truth. Then tell me the truth, Kalen said. All of it, not just the part that justifies more killing. Drex crossed his arms. He was built like a machine, but his face carried years of pain behind the hardness. The ghost taught us that mercy is a trap, that forgiveness gets you killed, that the only peace we'd ever know was the silence of our enemies. He also disappeared, Kalen reminded. He left no order to burn the galaxy. He left us to choose. That was his mistake, Drex spat. He left you. Kalen sighed. Drex, we've already won. No, Drex said, voice low and bitter. You want a pause, and in that pause our people forget. They marry alien blood. They erase the names of those who burned. They call our cause extreme, even dangerous. Because it is, Kalen snapped, sharper than intended. You're breeding another war, only this time we'll be killing ourselves. Drex stepped closer. Then maybe that's what it takes. Purify the legacy before it becomes weakness. Kalen's face darkened. So this is about purity now? It's about direction, Drex growled. We were heading towards something. Unity, discipline, power. You turned us into another galactic debate club. I gave us survival. You gave us decay. The words hung between them like venom. Then Kalen said something he hadn't meant to say aloud. Do you even remember what peace feels like? Drex blinked, and for the briefest moment, something cracked. The commander looked away, into the flickering darkness beyond the station's hull. No, he admitted. I don't. Haven was never home, just a bunker with air. Earth was the only thing that felt like anything, and we lost it. Kalen saw the truth now, not just anger in Drex's heart, but grief, the kind that turns to hate because it has nowhere else to go. You didn't start this movement for war, Kalen said quietly. You started it because you can't live with peace. Drex didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. Back on Haven, unrest had begun to boil. Rumors of Kalen's disappearance spread. White Fleet commanders grew nervous. A few border colonies pulled their ambassadors, fearing the return of the Black Fleet. One of Drex's lieutenants, a man named Vorin, launched an unsanctioned attack on a small trade route used by Elkar refugees. 3 ships were destroyed, all unarmed. The message was clear. Drex's movement wasn't in hiding anymore. They were testing the lines. Kalen's return would have to come with a reckoning, either a truce or fire. Back at the relay station, Kalen looked at Drex and saw the edge drawing near. I'm not here to argue philosophy, Kalen said. I'm here to ask you one question. Drex raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Kalen took a breath. If the ghost walked in here right now, would he be proud of what you've done? Drex didn't answer right away. Then he turned, slowly, and walked to a small steel case embedded in the wall. He opened it. Inside was a small data cube, an old analog chip, wrapped in blackened alloy, marked only with the ghost's original Terran ID code. I have his last war file, Drex said. Kalen froze. That file was deleted. Not all of it, Drex said. The AI wiped the primary log, but the relay systems captured a signal. A backup, uncompressed, buried under interference. And you've never shared it? I didn't want to taint his legacy. Or be proven wrong, Kalen said coldly. Drex stared at him, then tossed the cube onto the floor between them. Play it. The relay station hummed to life. A projector flickered. And then, there he was. The ghost. Older than either of them remembered. His voice was raw, unfiltered. "I built a monster," he said. "And I did it with purpose, with clarity. I needed them to fear us, to make them understand what it meant to erase a world." He looked off to the side, then back at the recorder. "But I forgot what happens when monsters outlive their makers." He paused. "I see Drex. I see Kalen. Two branches of the same fire. One burns forward. The other tries to warm others." His eyes narrowed. "They'll both be wrong if they forget why the fire started." He leaned forward. "The war was never about revenge, not really. It was about remembrance, about dignity. If we trade that for dominance, then we've already lost." The feed ended. Silence. Then Drex whispered. He knew. "Yes," Kalen said, stepping closer. "And he chose to vanish rather than feed the war anymore." Drex looked hollow, shaken, a man unmoored. "I believed I was preserving him." "No," Kalen said gently. "You were preserving the pain." Outside the station, Terran Reaper-class ships appeared on sensors, unmarked, cloaked in shadow, awaiting Drex's signal. Inside, Drex stared at the blade still embedded in the floor, the one he had carried for 20 years. Then, with slow hands, he pulled it free and sheathed it. "I'll call them off," he said. Kalen nodded, shoulders heavy with relief. "But I can't promise they'll all listen," Drex warned. "Some don't want peace anymore." "Then we show them the truth," Kalen said. "Not with words, with action." Back on Haven, the White Fleet mobilized, not for war, but for division healing. Kalen returned, not as a victor, but as a messenger. He brought Drex, and together they broadcast the Ghost's final message to every system where humans still lived. Not as a threat, but as a choice. It was called the Reconciliation Broadcast. Every Terran ship, white and black alike, every listening post, every allied colony, every satellite still orbiting the bones of dead Dominion planets, was overwritten. Not by force, by memory. The image of the Ghost appeared, speaking from the grave through a relic of war, not with fire or vengeance, but reflection. And the words mattered. Not because they were perfect, but because they were true. And finally, the truth was louder than the pain. The broadcast ran on a loop for 3 days. In that time, more than half of Drex's rogue fleet stood down. Some returned to Haven, surrendering arms voluntarily. Others simply vanished into space, choosing solitude over rebellion. A few refused entirely, but they were no longer an army. They were shadows. Without Drex's rage to anchor them, they drifted. And Drex? He stayed. Not in command, not in power. He took a post as a silent advisor on the new council. His name struck from all public record, his role left unspoken. Kalen never once called him a hero or a traitor. He called him what he was, a consequence. Haven changed, not overnight, but visibly. Memorial halls that once glorified victory were redesigned as museums, rooms of honest history, photos of Earth, burned and bright, logs of Dominion atrocities and Terran retaliation, names of civilians lost on both sides. The narrative shifted from retribution to restoration, and with it, a new generation of Terrans began to emerge. They weren't bred for war. They were raised to remember, to study how the fire began, and why it had to end. The recall envoys expanded, now joined by former enemies turned allies. Species who once feared the Black Fleet now flew beside it under banners of shared memory. And finally, the cycle began to break. Slowly, painfully, unevenly, but it broke. Kalen visited the Ghost's last resting place alone. He had the vigilant memory recovered, its orbit decay stabilized and sealed in geostationary memory. not as a warship, not as a tomb, as a monument. He walked its halls in silence. Rooms still smelled of cold metal and discipline, every console still marked by the ghost's touch. Precise, minimal, efficient. But in the commander's quarters, on the far wall, was something Kalen hadn't expected. A handwritten note, preserved in stasis. He opened it slowly. It read, "Kalen, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer the weight holding us together. Good. That means they finally looked past my shadow. Lead them better than I did. Teach them that silence is not always the answer. And when they ask about me, tell them I was wrong too. Not about the war, about how it would end. We were never meant to vanish. We were meant to remember. R." Kalen folded the note and tucked it into his vest. Not as an artifact, as a promise. In time, the former Dominion systems elected their own leadership, independent, guarded, but open. Some invited Terran ambassadors, others politely declined, but none fired again, because none forgot. And Earth? Still gone, still ash. But one sector, untouched by the fleet, had been quietly designated by the Terran Council as a memory zone. A sealed sector, orbiting the sun, with artificial gravity fields and orbital beacons repeating a single phrase. Here stood a people who refused to die quietly. It wasn't a planet anymore, but it was still a home, to memory, to pain, to dignity. Decades passed. Children of war grew into teachers. Soldiers became farmers. Old black ships were scrapped, melted down, and forged into hospitals, libraries, peace stations. And in the outer edge of known space, where the stars grew quiet and ancient ruins whispered across void winds, a scout vessel discovered something strange. A transmission. Not Terran, not Dominion, not known. Just a single phrase in an unknown tongue, roughly translated, "Where is the fire that once taught the galaxy fear?" Kalen read the report himself and smiled. Not because it was true, but because it meant they remembered, even in fear, even in silence. The last scene plays out not on a battlefield, not in a ship, not even in space, but in a classroom deep within Haven's rebuilt core. A child raises their hand and asks, "Were the humans really monsters during the vengeance cycle?" The teacher pauses, then answers softly, "No, but they were angry enough to become them." And that was the truth. The fire hadn't been justice. It hadn't been evil. It had been grief. And finally, after centuries, it had cooled. But it would never be forgotten, because no one knew where the human fleet came from, until the Empire was gone. And by then, it was already too late.